Hello! Today we're going to talk about the reality of learning multiple languages, and I'm glad to have you here because I think that's going to be a really interesting discussion for a lot of people. I know that many of you are interested in learning multiple languages, or you're wondering whether it's possible to do this at the same time or even at different times. And I think I can share with you my experience, my insights, and maybe I can help you navigate this better. I'm İclal. I speak 10 languages and at least 7 of them at sea level, and I've learned many languages at the same time because I'm 20 and when you look at my journey, I think it's kind of obvious that I did some simultaneous work. First things first, I think you want to ask yourself if you want to learn a language fluently or you just really want to become a polyglot. And I think many people can't make this distinction clearly. Because for many of you, the only example of someone who speaks a language fluently and who has a certain proficiency in them, someone you admire, someone you look up to, they happen to be a polyglot. So when your actual goal is to speak Spanish, like that one girl who speaks 10 languages, you feel like you have to speak 10 languages in order to speak Spanish like that. But that's actually completely wrong. You can also perfectly speak Spanish without having to learn 10 languages. Ask yourself, do I want to end up like this? Do I want to speak multiple languages? I mentioned this in my previous video. I haven't heard about the term polyglot until I became one. I just wanted to learn multiple languages. And actually, I didn't want to learn multiple languages before 2020. I was a proud French speaker, and then I became a French speaker and a polyglot. If you have been a long time follower, you probably know that I had a list as a child of the languages that I wanted to speak, and now I speak all of those languages and even more. But I also thought that I could play many instruments by the age of 20, but now I don't play any instruments because I haven't worked on that. You can't just have really unrealistic goals and expect them to happen one by one if you are not working towards the goal. So please start by asking yourself this question. Now let's talk about different scenarios when it comes to learning multiple languages at once. I want to first start by someone who speaks only English and they want to just start this journey of language learning. And I think there are a couple of advice that I can give you on this. First, you should take a look at your English level. Are you someone who's comfortable with English or do you struggle even with the basics? If you really struggle with English and if you feel like English is impossible to learn and you're kind of stuck in this, you are not going to have it easier with a foreign language because English is, in most of the cases, the easiest foreign language that you can learn, both structurally and both in terms of opportunities and resources that we have. So if you are struggling with English, I think there are things that you have to fix before fixing the language that you are learning. You should have a necessary level of English at least to understand basic instructions because the resources that we're going to use to learn another language are going to be in English. And if you experience problems with English grammar or logic, here it's not easier. It's always going to be a problem, so I would dedicate a few months on kind of improving my English, but I don't want you to think as a perfectionist here because a lot of people are like, I can't learn a new language until my English is perfect. You don't need a C2 unless you're going to teach at a university. You don't need a C1. It's really cool to have a C1, but if we have to be realistic, a normal person doesn't need it. So if you can understand basic English and follow instructions, I think it's the perfect time to learn a new language because we can't wait for your English to get better than this. And learning a second language is going to offer you such a unique perspective that you will also understand English better. Now let's talk about choosing a language after English. I think when it comes to language that you want to learn, that you want to speak, and that's probably going to make a big part of your future, that should be your personal choice. A lot of people come to me asking, what was your exact order learning languages because I want to follow the same thing so I can end up like you. One thing I always preach on social media is that you have to stay yourself, you have to be authentic, you have to have your own path, own personality because everyone has a unique journey and you can't force someone else's journey on yourself because we all live in different circumstances. So I can't really tell you what your next language is going to be, but if I have to share some advice with you, is that just follow something that you would like to learn. I don't think you should pay a lot of attention to statistics or what brings the most money, what brings the most opportunities, kind of limits your choice and you're not really going to use a language if you don't like it. I'm someone who speaks both French, Italian and Spanish, and Spanish is the one that I use the least. And believe me, a lot of people told me that I did a wrong choice by choosing French instead of Spanish, but now those people are still monolinguals and I speak both French and Spanish. Just learn a language that you would like to learn because you're always going to create opportunities for yourself. As an English speaker, if you want to play easy and safe, I think you could follow with a Germanic language or a Romance language. You also have to keep in mind that the modern English is compatible both with Germanic languages and Latin languages. I think that's why many of you start learning German and the first few months feel just fine because everything is just like English, and then after reaching A2 you're like, what are those grammatical structures? This language just makes no sense. You are fighting with a language that actually doesn't know you anything. So yeah, we can say that English is just like Germanic languages when it comes to basics or when it comes to the words that we use in everyday life. But once you are getting advanced, you will see that English is also really compatible with Romance languages. Of course, if you hear this and you become like, okay, since learning Germanic language is a good idea, maybe I should learn Danish. Then you should kind of construct your way in a way that you can use the Danish language. I think if you want to play safe, you can always go with the mainstream languages, but you can also choose something specific if you like it, because you are going to create the opportunities for yourself. No one's going to bring them for you. But yeah, there is no wrong choice that you can make while choosing the language that you want to learn next. By the way, if you want to learn French, if that sounds like a great idea, I spent the last 6 weeks building a French resources library. I think it's going to help everyone because there are both resources I use now at C2 level, the resources I use to practice or the news that I follow. And there are both resources that could help someone who hasn't yet started learning French. As someone who spent years learning and mastering the French language and who is really familiar with French media, I think I came up with a really precious work, and maybe if you would be interested in buying it, I have the links in my description. It's my own product, so maybe if you want to learn French, this could just catch your attention and I would really love to hear back from you. So if you're watching this video in hopes of starting French or just you are still learning French, as I said, this is going to help everyone. This is probably the best you can find. So yeah. If you're learning your first foreign language after English, I think it should have its own dedicated time, at least for a year. I know how much you want to learn a new language, but it's always better to kind of get the structure mastered in your head before you work with something else. Because learning a lot of languages at once is a skill that requires a good level of time management and also ability to manage the languages together, because some languages are going to confuse you a lot. So I think we can talk about language families and whether you should learn similar languages or different languages and how should be the timeline. Let's talk about learning similar languages or languages from the same language family. That's a good strategy, especially if you are someone who wants to speak multiple languages. So because learning languages from the same language family is the number one thing you could do to increase the number of languages that you speak. Also, it's going to help you understand your strategy of learning languages, because learning the second language is not going to be as difficult as learning the first one, because they are in the same family and now you kind of know the family. In this way, you are going to understand what you are doing while learning the language, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. So I think that's also a great choice if you want to work on your language learning method for future languages. When this wouldn't be a good idea, if you ask me, I think you should avoid learning similar languages if you haven't mastered one of them. At some point, they're going to get really confused in your brain. I experienced this with Romance languages. Basically, I was a really good French speaker. I reached C1 in French, then I started learning Italian. Learning Italian felt really, really easy, and also I understood a lot about my way of learning. So this helped me to understand myself, which helped me in the future while learning new languages or learning anything. So I didn't experience problems while learning French and Italian when my French was at C1, but after like 5 months when my Italian was around A2, B1, I also introduced Spanish. And I also learned Spanish really well. But the thing is, by the end of the year, I could hardly differentiate Italian and Spanish. Then I developed a strategy to overcome the confusion, and what I did was, I spent a few months focusing on Italian only. I revised Italian, I kept studying Italian, I took it to B2. That was also a time when I studied La Divina Commedia and made a huge research about that. I also wrote a homework about that. It was like my obsession back then, and I think it's really important to connect language learning with some kind of cultural activity. So by the end of these months, it was clear to me which language was Italian and which was Spanish, because I created a gap of levels. So I think if you'd like to learn similar languages, make sure that the first one is always stable. Just like how I didn't experience any problems learning Italian after French, because my French was quite stable at C1 level. It wasn't like I was going to lose my French overnight, but it wasn't the best idea to start learning Spanish with A2 Italian. So if you want to introduce a new language, at least be patient, or maybe learn something from a new language family. I think I have a really extreme example when it comes to this, because when I was 16, I started learning German and Russian during the same week. Now I'm 20 and I have C1 certificates in both German and Russian. But I think the journey itself is more important. So what kind of difficulties did I encounter while learning German and Russian at the same time? And was it a good idea? I don't think it's the best idea you can have, but it's not impossible. Like, it's possible within the limits of a human brain. But you shouldn't ignore that it requires a solid time management skill, and also a really strong mental health, mental capacity, the ability to cope with different things. Back then I was able to do this because we were in lockdown, and one thing about me is I detest high school. So basically during the entire academical year I had the privilege to not attend my classes mentally. I spent my time learning German and Russian instead, which was going to be more useful for me than high school classes. But I know that lockdown was an extreme case, so maybe an average person right now doesn't have the chance to do this. I understand. I also wouldn't have the opportunity or like the circumstances to repeat a similar thing. In this case, you should be asking yourself, is it really important for me to learn both of those languages at the same time? And the answer is probably going to be no. You can spend 1 or 2 years learning the first one, and then you could switch languages, or maybe you will realize that you actually want to learn something else. So I think it's also important to kind of experiment without knowing where the way is going to take you. However, when it comes to learning them at different times, or if you have at least B1 level in one of them, I think there isn't even a discussion here, because keep in mind that confusion is most of the times inevitable for someone who works with different languages. Because most of the times when you're trying to produce something in a weaker language, your brain is going to bring out the information from the most recent solid language. When I was trying to learn Swedish, I always accidentally spoke Dutch. Not French, not Spanish. I always accidentally spoke Dutch because Dutch was the most recent language in my brain. And I think that also tells you a lot about how you should keep a language really strong before introducing a new one, in the most ideal case. But you can also navigate different languages at the same time, as long as you are not going to cry over every single mistake and confusion. If you acknowledge that language learning is a game of failing and then succeeding again, you're probably going to achieve everything that you want. Confusions or not being able to dedicate the same time to each language are quite normal and make a part of language learning. But I think one should be able to see that clearly and don't freak out over every uncertain thing. So in the best case, I would tell you, make sure that you always have 1 or 2 languages at beginner level, and you are always updating the previous ones to avoid the confusion as much as you can. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful for you, and once again you can check my French resources from the description, and also you can follow me from different social media accounts to stay updated. See you on another video, and bye!